All right, welcome everyone for another episode of Pulp Addicts Pod. We got a great show for you tonight. We got a special guest, and man, can't wait to get into this. It's going to be awesome. We got Joe from GameSack, and yeah, let's get rocking. Let's go.
Hey, thanks guys for tuning in. So, if you guys don't know, GameSack is one of the longest running, if not the longest running retro video game channel. Right up there with, the other video game channels don't really focus on the retro so much. You've kind of got the market cornered in that case, I guess, Joe. I guess the only exception would be the nerd, but I mean, let's face it. If it wasn't for Mike Matai and his crew, he wouldn't know what the hell he was talking about.
Fair enough.
Whereas you and your former co-host Dave, actually, you guys really know what the hell you're talking about. And so, first of all, thanks for coming, Joe. How are you doing today?
Good. What's up?
Dude, so let's just jump right into this.
Let's do it.
The first question I have is, what was it, 2011 when you guys started? Yeah, because I remember, I think the way I found you was the Dreamcast episode, the console episode.
Right.
And I think, that was probably like 2013.
I don't remember exactly, but yeah.
So I did have to backtrack a couple of years, but basically I've been watching you guys for 10 years, and it's such an awesome show, and I can't tell you how many badass gaming experiences that I've been turned on to that I never would have known about or thought to have played if it wasn't for your show. And not to mention other systems that I never would, like the TurboGrafx, for example. I don't know, somehow when I was a kid, nobody had one, never heard of one, like, until I heard your show, and and we'll get a little bit more to that. But I really want to ask you, when you first started the show, were you like, how were you going into it? Was it just a passion project, or were you already confident that you were going to turn it into something? Or maybe did somebody influence you, or maybe the opposite? Maybe you saw somebody doing something similar and you're like, bitch, I could do better than that.
Yeah, basically that. There was a lot of, I was part of a forum called Sega 16 at the time, and I saw some guys from there making some videos, and they get like some really good views, like a lot. And I was like, these guys just turn on a camera and just talk, and they don't even appear on camera. They just point their camera at whatever they're talking about, and they're just talking. They'll point their camera at their TV to show gameplay. It's like, I could do better than that. And so, I said, hey, Dave, you want to make a video this Sunday for YouTube? And he agreed. And, I felt, hey, we can make it a little bit more professional, and the views will just come pouring in. Of course, they did not, but not for a long time. But that's how it goes on YouTube. And you don't automatically get a lot of views when you think you might. It's like some of my more popular episodes are ones that I didn't think it would get many views at all.
Right. Yeah, that's kind of how it goes, right? Like sometimes you put a lot of effort into one thing and nobody gives a shit, and then you just kind of throw something out there on the side, and next thing you know, that's the one that catches traction.
Yeah.
And I'm sure that's happened to you a few times, right?
Oh yeah, more than a few.
Yeah. And so when you first got started, I mean, so just to clarify for those of you that don't know, Joe does GameSack by himself now and has been doing so since what was it, mid 2019 when Dave White?
2019, I think. Mid 2019, you're right.
Yeah. So I mean, he came back for that epic Super Nintendo versus Genesis episode. That was pretty cool. But realistically, he left in
Yeah.
2019. But okay, before we get to that, let's go back. Was because I know you and Joe, or you and Dave rather, you guys kind of grew up together to some extent, right?
Well, we met each other in high school. So, yeah. I
So
mean,
somewhat, yeah.
yeah,
Okay.
we're already mostly grown up.
Right. So when you started doing your show, um, obviously you asked Dave if he wanted to be a part of it. Was there ever anybody else in the running for?
Oh, no way.
Oh, so he
Yeah,
was the only option.
yeah, I mean, like we made a lot of videos together before that anyway, just for fun. All since after we graduated high school and I got my first camera, we'd make lots of videos together. So there was definitely no other option ever. So
Right on. And
we both just loved video games, especially the old stuff.
yeah, you guys make a really good team, and I love the whole. So for those that don't know, you guys kind of exaggerate a little bit. Like, for example, you play the role of the Sega fanboy, whereas Dave would always play the role of the Nintendo fanboy.
Right.
And you guys would always crack jokes at each other and talk shit to each other on certain episodes and whatever, which I assume was exaggerated a little bit.
Oh yeah.
But yeah, but at the end of the day, he is a Nintendo fanboy, right? And you are a Sega fanboy.
Well, yes and no. We both collect for all systems. His Genesis collection is actually bigger than mine, so go figure.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I think I think I have him beat on Saturn and Dreamcast though, and definitely Master System. But his Genesis collection is pretty legit.
Right on. And okay, so how okay, so how long did how many years was it until you realized, like, oh, this could be a full-time gig here? How many episodes in, or how many years in?
Probably at least like 3 or 4 years in at least. I think I can't remember exactly when we started monetizing, but we didn't make a whole lot of money. So it was just basically a side thing while I did video editing for a different guy who I still occasionally do work for. But yeah, it was a while before it became lucrative. So probably a good 7, 8 years before it was actually lucrative.
Okay. And so is it how do I ask this? Cuz as far as I understand it, Joe, I mean, you do all the I mean, at least when Dave was involved, obviously you do all the production now.
Yeah.
But even when Dave was involved, you basically did pretty much all the production then too, right?
Basically, I mean, Dave would write his own scripts, play and capture his own games, and of course help think of ideas for like the end skits and our talking head segments and whatnot. So, and then my girlfriend at the time, Jen, would press start and stop on the camera, and help focus us and whatnot for the end skits. But yeah, I do all the editing and whatnot, and the back end, I guess you'd call it.
Okay. Yeah, that's kind of it just seems that way. Yeah. I think I might have actually heard you talk about that in some interview or another. But yeah, so when in and trust me, we're going to get into some straight nerdy video game talk in just a minute here. But but for now, so I'm sure you get asked this all the time, and I don't want to dwell on this for too long because of such things. But how did, like, when Dave decided to leave,
Mm-hmm.
how, like, did you try to? Because I think everybody understands, that's at least that follows you guys. You guys made it pretty clear. He has family obligations in his job, and something had to give, and unfortunately, it had to be gamesack, right?
Right.
Uh, did you try to convince him to stay, or did you just?
I just once tried, like, after he made the declaration that he wanted to leave, I was just kind of like, okay, what can we do? Or I can't remember exactly what I said, but I remember he responded like, no, it's time. I've been thinking about it for a while, or I can't remember exactly what he said, but it was something to that effect. And it's like, well, okay, let's do like 2 more episodes, but we got to announce that the one we're about to shoot tomorrow or this weekend or whenever it happened to be. But he wants to see his daughter grow up and be there as she does, and that was just, according to him, taking too much time away. I can understand. So he's like, I like the money, but I like my family more. And that's fine.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, initially I was like, what is he doing? Why would he ever leave GameSack? Like, what? But I've never had kids, so I guess I can't quite relate, but
my 500 kids, right?
yeah, see, Dave's got like 750 kids here.
Gigi's
Our
always
own
joking. He's always saying, he's jabbing me all the time. Oh, you and your 500 kids. Yeah, I got 500 kids. Yeah.
So yeah, I understand that. So when he left, we're gonna move right on from this, by the way. But I'm just curious, so when he left, did you even consider bringing someone else in, or did that
No,
ever occur to you? Yeah,
no.
I don't think that would.
I didn't want that.
Yeah,
It's, well, for one, Dave leaving means I make a lot more money. So there's a little selfish reason why I didn't. But it also means I could do things more on my own time, on my own schedule. Because like when Dave was there, we'd get together on Saturday afternoons and shoot the talking head segments, record his voiceover, and then do the end skit, and he'd go and I'd see him 2 weeks later and we'd do it all again. And then, but now, it's like, I'm ready to record the voiceover now. I'm ready to record the talking head now. I've finally got an idea for an end skit, which is always the hardest thing to do. I can do it now, and it's 1 a.m. it has freed some things up, and I can get some things done faster. I can pump episodes out more if I want, like the bonus episodes, which I've been able to do. And so it has been a double-edged sword. So it has had its good sides.
yeah, and yeah, totally understandable. And but anyway, so yeah, I can, kind of like you just mentioned in passing. I would imagine, I mean, coming up with a brand, because you're kind of known for the skits at the end of your show that you
Yeah.
do. You always have a new skit at the end of every single episode. That's got to be tough to come up with every time.
It is, and my original plan was not, after Dave left, is to not have skits every episode unless I felt inspired. But so far, I've been doing it, and it's like they're not all winners. They never have been, but I still enjoy it. It's like
that's the camp,
somehow,
though, right?
yeah.
I mean, that's what makes
somehow it's been my favorite part of doing each episode, and it's when I think back to an episode, it's always what skit was in it, and they're, like I said, they can be dumb, but they're usually my favorite part of an episode after they're all put together.
That's cool.
And one last question before we get into actual game talk is the stop motion stuff that you do, which is, I mean, the whole intro is stop motion. You do a lot of, I mean, that's a big part of your show. Isn't that like, I don't know, like I would be way too lazy to do something like like is it, how hard is that to do, and how long does that like?
Well, it's pretty easy. I mean, I've been doing it for a while though. Um, and it doesn't take as long as you think, mainly because I have been doing it for a while. But it's always something, that and just animation in general is always something I've had a passion for. So it's like I want to explore those passions. So yeah, I'm going to do it regardless. And I'm kind of glad because like there's been other YouTube channels that have kind of imitated mine, like, sound effects when they put something in or whatever, which is, totally fine. In fact, it's flattering, but no one else has done the stop motion. I mean, the Angry Video Game Nerd has done it a few times, but other than that, it's kind of nice because,
Yeah, that's kind of your thing.
right.
Yeah. And that's cool, man. And yeah, yeah, that's awesome. And okay. Oh, let me check the okay, we're good. So all right, so let's start getting nerdy here.
Yeah.
So if I had to take a wild guess just based off of watching your show for over 10 years, what is your favorite game console? And by favorite, I don't mean like what do you think is the best necessarily, just like what is your personal favorite console? I would imagine it would be the Saturn if I had to guess. But I don't know. What is it?
I'm gonna have to say the Genesis. Just
Really?
because, yeah, just because I got it like when it launched, when it was first available here, and it was just I tried to play every single game I could, via rentals, when it was available, and I just thought it was so cool. There are a lot of other consoles that I really, really like too, but at the end of the day, I think it's probably the Genesis.
So when did you first pick up your own Genesis? Was it 88 right when it came out, or?
No, it came out in '89 over here, so it was like
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
I think it's September, October '89. I got it because it came out here in Denver after it came out like in LA and New York. It came out in LA and New York, I think in August, and then it came out here in September or October. Whenever it came out here, I picked it up right away because I had saved it. I had planned to get one, and it wasn't like it is today. Exactly the day it's going to come out. You just have to keep going to the store over and over. So I gave my grandmother the money, and she would, while she was out, she would stop by like Lionel Play World and check to see if it was in. And I'd come home from school, because I stayed with my grandmother until my mom got off work and picked me up. And then one day I got home from school and she just jumped out of the kitchen. She says, "I got it." And I was like, "Woo!" So it was pretty
Nice.
cool.
So what was the first game that came with it?
Well, Altered
Did you get a
Beast.
couple?
Ooh,
Yeah.
I
Well,
love
all I had was Altered Beast until
Well, because that was a pack-in, wasn't it?
right. And the first game I got, because I think I got it on a Wednesday or Thursday, and a couple days later on Saturday, I remember I went down and I bought Thunder Force 2. It was either that or Space Harrier 2 or Super Thunderblade. And I was like, my friend Tom had gotten Space Harrier 2. I was like, well, I can just borrow it from him. So I'm going to take a chance on Thunder Force 2. And that game blew me away. I was like, yeah.
I mean, that's a pretty epic game, right?
Yeah, I thought so. I still think so.
Yeah. I mean, it's not quite Thunder Force 4, but
right. But back then, I was like, wow.
Yeah, at the time, yeah, absolutely. So I think I don't know, I might be misconstruing, but what was was that your first video game console, or
No, it was the Sega Master System was my first console, and I got that because I liked the games that Sega had in the arcade, and it's like these are the games I really like. They're available on the Sega system. I'm getting the Sega system, so that was
Nice.
that.
Yeah, and that's because man, back then, I mean, it was almost, not many people knew what the Master System even was.
Hmm.
It was all Nintendo.
Yeah,
You
they played both commercials, so that's how I knew how they were or what they were. And I was like, video games, they just interested me as long as they weren't Atari. They were both way better than when I had played on Atari. And I was always still fascinated with the Nintendo. Every time like the Sunday newspaper would come out and they'd come with like the ads, like there was like Child World or Children's Palace had this whole thing of ads or this store and that store. And I'd always look at the video games and they'd have all the Nintendo stuff pictured. And I'm like, that is so cool. And I still wanted it. I still really liked the stuff, but you're a stupid little kid. You can only afford one or the other, especially when you're buying it all with allowance money.
right, right, and so I mean, was there any well, I guess the obvious factor as to why, because when you look at Europe, like the Master System was quite a bit more popular over there than it was over here, and same thing with um, well, we'll get to the later systems later, but what was it really all the reason why Nintendo was so much further ahead with the NES as far as like marketing and sales goes? Um, is it really just because of their questionable, exclusivity deal? You can't make games for anybody else.
I think that was a large part of it, but another large part of it was, of course, their exclusives, games they made themselves. You can't get, Super Mario Brothers 2 or 3 on Sega. You can't get The Legend of Zelda or Metroid. And yeah, I think that was a big part of it. But I don't know, even in Japan, where I don't believe that exclusivity thing had any effect. Yeah, I really don't know. But they weren't making a lot of games for the Master System because it didn't sell well in Japan. So who knows? Even if they didn't have that, how it would have turned out. I think Nintendo still would have been ahead, at least in North America. I don't know what Europe's deal was, but I think they had trouble selling the NES there for whatever reason.
Yeah, there was some sort of effery going on there where they couldn't quite make the same impact and
Right.
say, because I've got a lot of European friends and they all say like, yeah, we all had Master System.
Yeah.
Like, so where do you think in America um when exactly I mean, because at some point Sega actually was outselling even the Super Nintendo for
Yep.
it might have been just a brief bit, but at one point they were King Kong of the mountain. Where did that start? Did that start with Sonic, or
That certainly helped, but I think it started with Mortal Kombat having blood in it and the Super Nintendo version not. So that kind of knocked things over one way, and Nintendo realized, yeah, so if we want to sell these, we're going to have to let them put the blood in it. So Mortal Kombat 2 comes out, and they both have blood in it. And then
right?
Nintendo starts picking up traction again.
Didn't you have to
Yeah,
put a blood code in there though?
You did, but everyone knew it.
Yeah.
So,
ABACABBA, I believe.
Abacab.
That's the code.
Dang, that's pretty good. I liked
Something
Game
like
Shark. Game Shark was like made things easier. Those little things that
Wait,
you add in there and then you put the
yeah,
cassette on top of that and then Game Shark just took over and you didn't have to do any of that crap.
yeah. And then, well, the Sega CD version, of course, I think just you didn't have to do anything. It was already in there.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. Um, but isn't it? So was that when did Mortal Kombat come out? The first one that with all the blood controversy. Was that before Street Fighter 2 came out on SNES, or
No. It was definitely after, because Street Fighter 2, I
'cause I
remember,
think
was definitely first.
because that's what really kicked Super Nintendo into high gear, right?
Yeah. That was definitely before, because I remember buying it on the Super Nintendo. And I remember when Mortal Kombat came out, I had a certain job that I didn't have when Street Fighter 2 came out. So that's how I remember.
Yeah. And I mean, Genesis did get a version of it much later, like 2 years later or something. But for a while, you could only play it on Super Nintendo, which, I mean, let's face it, that sucks because there's only 4 face buttons.
Yeah, I didn't like using the shoulder buttons for my strong attacks, and
Yeah.
I didn't
I
like
don't care.
going to the option screen and changing it every time.
Yeah, I don't care what Dave White says. It's way better on the Genesis.
It is, except for the audio. So
Except for the audio was pretty. Why is that? Why was that?
well, because Capcom didn't really know what they were doing. They used a really bad sound engine or driver on there, and fans have rewritten that driver and put it back into the game, and the voices, even with the samples they included in there, sound much better without re-recording them and stuffing new samples in there. So it's just Capcom's ineptitude of the time. So go figure.
It's not, like, it almost seems like they just didn't finish developing it.
I don't know. And, some people say, well, yeah, Nintendo wanted to make sure it was worse in some, demonstrable way over than the Super Nintendo version. I don't know if that's true or not, but
Yeah, because I've played some of those the Genesis hacks where the sound is improved, and I think they even improved the frames of animation to a certain extent. I could be wrong about that part, but the sound was definitely drastically improved. And it's like, well, if some random dude living in a cabin in the woods can do that, why didn't Capcom do that in the first place?
Yeah, I mean, there's some things to take into consideration with that. Of course, Capcom was on a limited amount of time, and because they had to reprogram the game themselves, because originally they shoved it off to a third-party developer to make the game for them on the Genesis. And then Sega didn't like that, so Capcom had to remake the game themselves, so they had even less time. So, but then you go look at like Super Street Fighter 2, where they had a lot more memory and a lot more time, and it's still really bad. So, who knows?
What's ironic is out of all of there were so many Street Fighter 2 versions. There was the original one, Super Street Fighter 2, Super Street Fighter 2 Turbo, and then the Genesis ones, Street Fighter 2 Hyper Fighting, all that. And out of all the systems, for some reason, the 3DO got the best version.
It's pretty good.
The only problem was their bullshit controller. You had to send in for the Capcom kind of twisted controller.
Yeah, that weird thing. Yeah, the 3DO version, the controller was weird, and also it didn't have parallax scrolling, so everything was just like a flat background. And I was like, come on, this is a 3DO, it's 32-bit, but
I didn't notice that.
Yeah, it can't run smoothly when they separate the background into multiple layers and stuff.
Interesting.
But most people, like you said, you didn't notice that. A lot of people didn't notice that. So, but yeah, other than that, though, it was great.
Well, I'll tell you one thing. I never even thought about parallax scrolling until I watched your show.
That's the first time I've heard of it.
Okay, so let's Joe, let's explain what parallax scrolling is.
Parallax scrolling is basically you have 2 or more layers that they move at different speeds as that scrolls past you, so it gives it an illusion of depth. It was something that was really popular in arcade games back when the NES and the Master System were in homes, and the home games didn't really do that a lot. So when the Genesis came out and it had 2 built-in background layers specifically to do that, I was blown away. I was like, sweet, this is awesome.
Yeah, see, but like I said, I'd never noticed that kind of stuff until I started watching your show, and then sure enough, I go back and play like both the versions. It's like, oh shit, he was right. You know,
Yeah.
so okay, now here's the unless Dave or Russ, do you guys have anything you want to bring up real quick before we take a deep dive into a new subject?
Not really, except for I did like your last video on all those the reviews for the Genesis, the new mini.
Mini?
Yeah. I can't
Had
wait
to make that one in a big hurry.
But that was cool. That was great. That was a great review, and it definitely made me want to get one. Yeah.
Okay, well, I've got a huge question about that, which is, why on earth would they not include Lunar and Lunar 2 on the American version when it's on the Japanese version? Why would they not include those 2 games? Or is it Lunar?
I always say Lunar, but
yeah, so do I.
They did contact Victor Ireland of Working Designs, whose company did the localization for that on the Sega CD, and he owns. To my knowledge, I don't know exactly how all the rights work right now, but he was able, or he would have been able to give them the text translations that they wanted, and the new the voices that he recorded in English, and the songs and what have you. But apparently Sega, the allocation of Genesis Mini 2s that they wanted to sell was very, very low. So because it was kind of an afterthought, they just took the Mega Drive Mini 2 and was like, slapped a Genesis label on it, because it's not even exactly like the Genesis Mini 2, because it has, I have it down here, it has a slider button for the power.
Yeah, that was
instead of a push button, right?
Yeah,
and then there's no LED, and so they did that in a hurry, and
I like
they
how
were only going to
threw
bring
that
this
shit
out.
away.
They were only going to bring this out in one batch, like stock it in Amazon Japan or whatever, and it's done. There's going to be no further allocations, and that means that they weren't willing to spend a decent amount of money to license the texts from Working Designs to get it on there. And according to Victor, they offered him a very low one-time fee for that. And the Lunars were like some of the highest selling games on the Sega CDs. I can imagine that would be insulting. But it wasn't just him. They couldn't license like the Taito Laserdisc games like Road Avenger, Time Gal, and Cobra Command. So they weren't really willing to even put a lot of money in it in Japan. And they blamed the chip shortage for that. And in my opinion, they should have just, waited a year. It's like, it didn't need to come out now, but they wanted it to come out now. And that's why a lot of things on the Mini 2 are a little bit half-baked, like versus Puyo Puyo-san was supposed to have a single player mode, but they wanted it out in October, so they didn't have time to finish that. And there's a lot of other things that M2 could have used more time to perfect about it, in my opinion. And I just think they should have waited until the chip shortage wasn't an issue, and they could have had a bigger allocation of units and, paid the licensing fee to get some of those games on there. And another one they could have had on there is Snatcher. They would have had to license that from Konami. I don't know if they tried or not. And
wait, hold on. Snatcher's not on the American version?
No, it's not on the Japanese version either.
Oh, I thought it was for some reason.
No, it's on the TurboGrafx Mini.
Oh, maybe. Okay.
But they didn't even put some of their own games on there, like Dark Wizard, which is another strategy RPG, pretty good one. A little clunky, but still really good. They made that game themselves. They wouldn't even have to, license it or anything. They didn't put that on there. So it's just kind of weird.
Yeah, I mean, It is cool just in general that they included Sega CD games on this one. Just as a general thought, like that's awesome, you
Mhm.
know. But man, because maybe not the best RPGs ever, but man, those two. I don't know if you've played through those two Lunar games, but I did.
Absolutely.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I did too. And yeah, I especially the second one. Like, at least include the second one. You know,
Well,
like
I think if you're going to include one, you got to include both. And then Potful Mail was another one that really should be on there because
oh
it's an
yeah,
amazing game.
it really is. It gets hard as hell at a certain point when you get into it. Like I had to start looking up strategy guides and stuff. Like at a certain point, but yeah, I'm probably about 80% through that game, and I haven't picked it up in a while. But
Yeah, I don't
that,
remember having much difficulty with it, but yeah, it's an excellent game.
yeah, but you have glasses, which means you're smarter than I
I don't always wear. I beat it before I started wearing glasses. So
am. But yeah, like at first, Pot Mail is pretty. You get right along with it, and then all of a sudden things get complicated. But really cool game all the same. And so that is on the Japanese version
mhm.
as well.
Yep,
Wow. And they left that out of the American version?
yep,
What a bunch of morons. Okay, so
yeah.
what about the European version? Is
Oh,
it
same thing. Yeah, I mean,
so the
it would.
European is just the same as the American
Yeah,
version?
I mean, the text translations would have had to been sourced from the same place. Otherwise, they would have just put the European versions on the American version. But
Oh, yeah.
if it came out, I don't think that those games came out in Europe at all ever. But I think the only English versions were from Working Designs. So there you go.
Yeah. And I know some people don't like working designs, but honestly, I'm I love working designs. They brought some of the best games over.
They did.
Sure, they added their own little, quirky sense of humor to the
Yeah,
game.
I always got a kick out of that. It kind of pisses off some people because it's not directly literal. I don't know what that was. I'm probably darker now, but
You're fine.
um, um, yeah, it's. I always thought it was funny. It is just because they would say things that NPCs wouldn't say in normal RPGs, and it's like it's just funny. It gave the game's personality, but it's like I said, some people have a stick up their ass about it. It's like, no, it's got to be literal.
Yeah, it's like especially with the Lunar games and even Pop Mail, I guess. Apparently, the Japanese heads of Sega, for some reason, still think that Americans don't want to play badass RPGs for some reason. Is that still the case?
Ever since Final Fantasy came out, or Final Fantasy VII, sorry, um, that is RPGs have grown immensely in popularity. So if they still think that, then they're idiots.
Well, that's kind of my point. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
But yeah, so okay, now we're gonna get into one thing I really wanted to talk to you about is the whole sort of what's the best way to say this? The demise of Sega as a console manufacturer.
Mm-hmm.
Um Obviously, we all know the main theories, right? Oh, the Sega CD and the 32X and blah blah.
Yeah.
Honestly, I'm pretty sure the 32X didn't help anything.
No.
I think we can all agree on that. But some people try to blame it on the Sega CD as well.
Yeah. No.
Yeah,
Definitely no.
I don't think so either because I knew a lot of people that had Sega CDs, and Russ here is actually he was a Sega CD guy too, right? Aren't you?
Oh yeah, still got mine.
Still got it. Yeah, still got it.
Good for
So,
you.
what? Because here's what's interesting to me. When I grew up, obviously everybody knew about the Genesis. I mean, that was just as big as the Super Nintendo. Sega CD came around. Not as many people knew, but it was still like, well, not as many people had it, but at least people knew it was there.
Oh yeah.
The 32X, you started losing people. But then came the Sega Saturn, which, in my opinion, that's my favorite console, honestly.
Yeah, it's a great console.
It's kind of a tie between the Saturn and the Dreamcast for me.
Mhm.
But when the Saturn came around, I really want to get into this because nobody knew what a Sega Saturn was when I was growing up. Nobody.
Right.
I don't know. I didn't know a single person, not only that had one, but anybody that even knew what it was. I was the only kid that was like, holy shit, I want one of those. You know, like, dude, it's Sega, and plus it's called the Saturn.
Yeah.
Badass name, you know? And I didn't end up getting one until after it was commercially irrelevant. You know, like it wasn't until like 99 or 2000 when I finally like saved up my allowance money
Mhm.
to get one, because I would have been in middle school at that time. But I was just really surprised, like, how does nobody else, because everybody has PlayStation and 64, so we're obviously talking about the 32-bit era here now. But nobody seemed to know about the Saturn. And by
Right.
nobody, I mean absolutely nobody. But you know, going back on YouTube these days, you can look up all of these different commercials that they ran in America for the Saturn, which is weird because, you know, just as any kid back in the day, I used to watch TV all the time and see video game commercials. I only saw one Saturn commercial ever, and it was for Sonic R, which is arguably a pretty shitty game. I mean, I got good at it eventually, and I actually beat the whole thing. And yeah, I grew to like it. But all those other commercials, they didn't run in my area. And it's interesting because as I've grown older and I've talked to people about this, it's like it almost seems like Sega only promoted the Saturn in certain corners of the country, and then in other corners they just completely didn't even bother. Do you have any information on, is that even a correct theory at all?
I don't know. It's possible, but all I do know is that they launched the Saturn like 5 months early or however long it was. They launched it in May when they should have launched it in September. It was a surprise launch. A lot of the retailers didn't like that. A lot of the third parties that were making games for them didn't like that. They really burned a lot of bridges when they did that. And you know, the Japanese CEO was the one who made them do that and launched it early in America, and it was doing okay in Japan. In fact, it did pretty damn well in Japan. But that was just something they never could possibly recover from. And then when they did launch it early, it didn't sell very well. And, you know, when the PlayStation came out, it sold even worse. I don't really know the exact numbers or how it did, but it didn't sell well enough to where they could really market it very well. I know Tom Kalinske left, and he's the one who got the Genesis really popular, and that certainly didn't help. And they just, people moving in and out of Sega of America, and that was just saying things like the Saturn isn't our future. That didn't help. And
the
Bernie Stolar.
Yeah.
So it's like the second they made the decision to launch it early, they were pretty much doomed. It's like, don't do that unless you're absolutely ready, which they were not. So
So I would, so with all that said, I would imagine that that was more of the start of the downfall than
Oh
something
yeah.
like 32X.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, like you said, the 32X certainly didn't help things, and I don't think anyone. I mean, there were probably some people who didn't buy a Saturn because of the 32X. Like, why would I buy a Saturn when it's basically a 32X? Or they got them confused. Who knows? Obviously, they didn't buy a 32X if they thought that Saturn was coming out, but they ended up not buying a Saturn either. So I don't know. I think the Saturn itself was what started bringing Sega down more. Um, and then they were probably bleeding money that entire time, probably even before the Saturn launched. And then when the Dreamcast came out, they just put so much into it. It had an amazing launch, but
Right.
it's still, they were bleeding money. And then I don't know, their heart wasn't in it. I don't think they tried with the Dreamcast. I guess at least some of them did, but
Well, I think the Japanese hearts weren't in it, but I mean, because like you said, the Dreamcast had an epic launch at the
really
time.
did.
That was the most successful console launch in history at
Yep.
that time. And I remember those 99.99 ads.
Yeah. Yeah.
Those would play on MTV all day long. I remember that quite clearly. and and that's the weird thing. Like when I was a really young kid, everybody had a Genesis,
Mhm.
and then middle kid, like nobody even knew what a Saturn was. But then after that, all my friends had a Dreamcast. We all like that was the most popular thing in my neighborhood. I'm not sure about where everybody else grew up, but
Yeah, and I'm wondering
Dreamcast
about
was,
the cost of the R&D for the Dreamcast because it was so ahead of its time. And
yeah.
so maybe that, just getting the thing produced cost them an arm and a leg. Because I know they were losing a lot of money on each console sold that they were trying to make up with software. And I'm guessing they didn't do that. So that was the end of that.
Wow. By the way, I just
Um,
want to mention to everybody that I do have Joe's links in the chat. So for those of you who want to go to his channel, and please like and subscribe like we always do with every show. And definitely go over to Joe's channel.
Appreciate that.
Absolutely, man.
all right, real quick. But well, another thing I'm wondering about is because not only invested a lot in the Dreamcast situation, but damn, all right, but they spent a hell load of money on Shenmue.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, they did.
Yeah, and which even to this day is very it's one of those like either you love it or you hate it.
Mhm. Yeah.
And
I mean, I love it, but yeah, it was definitely a money sink for them. Is just too bad too. But yeah, I love it.
yeah, me too, man. Especially, and honestly, like I know a lot of people, the third one that just came out a couple of years ago, which
Yeah.
I remember times, like 10 years ago where if you even brought up Shenmue 3, you would get banned from the chat room because yeah, nobody wanted to hear it. They were like, dude, it's never going to happen. And then I'll never forget E3 2015 when they they played the music, Yu Suzuki came out. I was like, yes! I was so like I literally yelled out loud to myself watching it on my computer. But
I'm gonna make that a sound clip, by the way.
The chat room moderators was busy that night banning everybody.
Hey.
But so I've got okay. So we're going a little bit shorter than we planned tonight, just because of our schedules. So for one, is there any way we could do a part 2? Is that possible?
Maybe down the line. Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
Oh,
sure.
that's great.
Okay,
We'd love to have you back, Joe.
that'd be fantastic. But I've got one last question because
Sure.
I was looking up a list of apparently officially planned for the Dreamcast, but ended up being canceled games.
Mm-hmm.
2 very interesting games were on that list. One of them was Grand Theft Auto 3.
Oh, interesting. I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either.
I wonder how that would have been. You know?
Yeah, like, well, that's my question for you. Like,
Yeah.
would that, because, I mean, GTA 3 was a...
Yeah, that was the turning point.
Yeah, that's when the PS2 really...
Yeah.
You know, that was a console seller, so to say.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
But how would that have worked without a second analog stick? You know?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm sure the game, when it moved to the PlayStation 2, and they're like, oh, we have so much more freedom now. And, but, that's a good question. I'm sure it would have been fine. It wouldn't have been as good as what we eventually got. I wonder if it would have been, similar, or if it would have been another one of those overhead type Grand Theft Autos that they were making up to that point. It's, that's a question for the developers, I guess.
That's a good point. Yeah, I don't know too much about that, but I mean, let's say Grand Theft Auto 3 came out in the same fashion that it did on the PS2, but instead it came out on the Dreamcast. Do you think that would have saved the Dreamcast, or do you think they were already hemorrhaging too much money at that?
It might have. That's a good question, because people would have bought a lot of Dreamcasts, and they were losing money on every Dreamcast. So, and they're buying it to play Grand Theft Auto, but they're not buying games made by Sega, which is where they need to make their money. So, I don't know, it could have hurt them even more, which is probably why they tried to get out as soon as they did. That's just my opinion.
Mm.
Okay, interesting. And then the last one is the other game that I was very surprised to see, which actually our friend Cortana, who didn't make the show today, she actually used to work for Bungie.
Oh yeah.
And sure enough, Halo was originally, I think it's even on the Wikipedia. If you go to Wikipedia and look up canceled Dreamcast games, Halo is one of those games on that list.
Interesting.
And again,
yeah.
So that was a console, obviously the biggest console seller for Xbox. So
right, but I think what happened with that is Microsoft just poured a lot of money into that to make it as good as it ended up being. I don't know how it would have been if it came out on the Dreamcast. It would have definitely been interesting if there's a build out there. But I think Microsoft poured a lot of money into it to make it as good as it ended up being, personally.
Yeah, and plus there's the whole Peter Moore conspiracy. Are you familiar with that?
No, I am not.
Do you remember who Peter Moore is?
Yeah, I do.
Yeah. So, well, perhaps we'll have to get into that next time, because I guess
okay.
Do we have to? I can go for another 2 hours, but I think everybody else has to go. So.
You can go for 2 days, actually. But yeah, unfortunately, that is all the time we have. But it's been awesome. Yeah, we would love to have you back, Joe. That'd be cool. Amazing.
Yeah, and so real quick, Joe, where can everybody keep up with you? And
just Google GameSack on YouTube. Google GameSack on YouTube. Just type in GameSack on YouTube search thing, and all one word or 2 words, it doesn't matter. It'll probably lead you to the same place. That's just the easiest way to do it.
Right on. All right. Well, thanks again, man, for coming on, and really hope we can do a part 2, because believe you me, I'm not done.
Okay.
No, he's not. He's really not. But yeah, thanks again. It was a fantastic show.
Cool.
All right, guys.
All right.
All right,
that-
Gigi, take us home. Get us out of here.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for tuning in to the Pulp Addicts Pod. We'll be back next Monday, I think. Right? And we should be, absolutely. Thanks for everybody that tuned in and everybody in the chat room. We appreciate you. Have a great rest of your night. Have a great rest of your week. And, of course, catch Beyond the Strange coming up next Sunday. And, of course, our show, Shift Happens, coming up this Friday. And, yeah, that's it. Thank you very much, folks.
All right, guys. Everyone in the chat, thank you. Have a good night.